Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Women Writers Fest. This is the first edition of the year 2021. So, a happy new year to everybody as we kick off very deep conversations on how literature festivals, writers, and authors are grappling with a post pandemic world. Most importantly, Women Writers Fest now is in its 39th edition. And we continue to bring new voices, emerging voices, aspiring writers and authors who are writing across spectrum on across issues across genders here on the Women Writers Festival. It's been a very, very rewarding journey to explore and push boundaries on how we can bring newer talent and very, very inclusive voices from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, thanks to our new virtual world, to bring a completely different facet of the idea of writing, the changing idea of writing, rather. We've seen whether it's the films or the rise of the web series and OTT platforms giving creative freedom to up and coming writers, to authors who are now looking at very, very strong, controversial central subjects. All of that plays out in the journey of a Women Writers Festival here, and we are delighted to continue this from a multi-city edition to a multi-country edition, and this one will be no different. We will kick off this festival by introducing three special voices. First is our co-curator, Deepshikha Chakravarti, who has, as usual, done a fantastic job of trying to get you some brilliant voices and try to steer clear of, falling in the trap of getting you the usual voices at a time when we all must force ourselves to hear and listen to people who are talking about different issues and are bringing a completely different new style and approach to writing. My guest today on the discussion that is going to be in focus on how literature festivals will shape henceforth are two fantastic women. Nirmala Lakshman, who's the Hindu Lit for Life curator, and I've got Anjum Katyal, who's for a very long time been curating the APJ Kolkata Literature Festival, but now also looks at the Nabana Earth Weekend, Shanti Niketan. I was telling them that in India, we are very fortunate to have a very, very strong presence of women in curating festivals. Whether it is, whether it is, I guess, the Times Festival or whether it is the Kumau Festival, all of these, or Mountain Echoes, women are integral to these festivals. But where are we going from where we are today? And how will things change for readers, authors, viewers, and listeners? I'll put that question first to Nirmala. Nirmala, 2021, are we in for a rethink?
Hi, first of all, let me say thank you to you, Shaili, to Women's Writers Festival, and Deepshikha, of SheThePeople. You've been doing a marvelous, sustained, marvelous work over all these troubled times, and very grateful that you got off to a great start for 2021. Happy New Year to all, and I think it's very important that we stay focused on, on being there and being on the ground, which I think you've done in a remarkable way. I think as curators and as people who are really passionately believe that through the voices of writers that ideas and engagements with the art would maybe make a difference to the larger reading or the interested public. I think the festivals have come to stay in whatever form or the other. I don't think this pandemic is, desperate and as sad though it is, and it has caused a great deal of havoc around. There's been, loss and struggle, starting with, the impoverishment of people, then the disease itself causing havoc. I feel that voices of writers and people who have interested in, conveying conveying messages of, positivity are very important. And I think our platforms will continue to do that. And hopefully we'll have to reimagine what a literature festival can do as we go ahead. And certainly it's a whole new world, but I would say it's a brave new world because I think JLF used that as a tagline somewhere. So I don't want to dwell in stress that, but definitely we're encountering very, very interesting and challenging times, not only in terms of the money and the kind of, renegotiating our spaces, but also in terms of substance. What do we need to look at as our priorities? And I think some of the old issues still remain as our priorities. The disadvantaged, the less visible, especially women, and this whole sphere of politics, literature, the arts, where there's been a great deal of churning. So I think our voices have to be there. We have to just reimagine who we are. And also one more thing, Shaili, I just feel that we have to be aware of the changing circumstances with the vaccinations and the kind of a fight against coronavirus that's going on the ground. Incredibly brave and somewhat globally coordinated fight that's going on. I feel we'll also move towards the end of the year to a better place, and I think we'll have to be ready to make that transition to a more sort of a curated thing of calling different groups of people to attend smaller on the ground sessions, so that that you don't miss out on the people to people interaction, which I think is the lifeblood of literature festivals. So I think I'll just pick it up later as we can continue the conversation.
So Anjum, would you like to tell us a bit about your experience and how you think the pandemic has changed the literature festival and the scene around it?
Yes, actually, it was very interesting listening to Nirmala talking about exactly what so many of us have been thinking of. And once again, I'd like to echo her in thanking you, Shaili, and thanking you, Deepshikha, for thinking of this session actually, and also thinking of inviting us. And I'm very, very happy to be here. I was thinking while Nirmala was talking, and to add to the points she's already made, literature was earlier on seen as a very private activity. Reading, writing, they were both tended to be seen as things one did by oneself in isolation. And when the literature festival started and established itself, one of the biggest aims was to create that sense of community, to be able to kind of bust out of the isolation paradigm and see how literature could connect with large groups of people and how those people could connect with each other and with their artists. And the sheer excitement to be able to see your favorite writer up close, to be able to ask questions directly, to be able to sit alongside other literature lovers, book lovers, share thoughts, hear the kinds of responses they had, that kind of a buzz was something that the literature festivals were able to offer. And it's a completely new concept. Apart from small academic conferences, maybe this kind of a thing has never been done for the general public before. I think that has been the biggest body blow that the pandemic brought about, because it disallowed that. It disallowed the freewheeling, the closeness, the community, the sharing. And in that, literature festivals shared the loss along with all wide performative venues and situations, whether they were theatre festivals or dance festivals, music festivals. So that whole festival sort of excitement, the atmosphere, the ecosystem that went with building a festival took a big body blow because of the pandemic. But as Nirmala has also pointed out, nobody was thinking that this is the end. This is where we're going to be forever. There was always a sense that we're going to work through this. Things are going to return to some sort of different reality, maybe, but certainly we're not going to be trapped in front of our screens and within our four walls for the rest of our lives. I don't think anybody ever thought of that as the reality. So a lot of the thinking evolved into how do we then take this challenge that has been thrown at us, turn it around in some form, see what good comes of it, and build on it for something new that may emerge in the future. So, one of the biggest explosions that happened over the year was this business of online cultural and arts activities. And I'm saying it, I'm linking literature in deliberately with the broader culture and art scenario, because we saw cinema, film screenings going online, theatre festivals going online, and of course, dance, even dance, one of the most challenged areas, managed to create an online presence, and definitely literature. What started happening was that online literature festivals, even if they didn't call themselves festivals, events were able to bring together authors who were living in scattered time zones, completely different areas and continents of the world, and be able to join them in conversations in a way that was very difficult earlier because of the sheer geographical logistics of travel as well as the enormous costs. So this was a big, big plus for a lot of literature festival planners. It opened up a possibility. Suddenly, you could talk to poets in Ireland. You could talk to somebody in Turkey, along with an Indian, writer, and that was so exciting. It was not something that any of us would have had the budgets to do earlier if we were still talking about a real physical festival. So that was one great learning, that the visual world and the screen could actually open up, link you up in a way that was not feasible when we were only thinking of physically, geographically located festivals. The other one was the excitement of exploring the technology. There was a challenge, and younger people who'd been having fun with the screen for a much longer time than many of us were able to show the way, to show how you can break through this framing that many see as very predictable, very boring, and make it a little different, make it a little more exciting, keep it interactive, so that people still feel that they are linked in somehow and can see other people's responses and share in the chat. So I'm sorry, I'm sort of carrying on and on, but I feel it's a mix of taking that very severe disappointment that arrived at the beginning of last year and then working through it, facing the challenges, and thinking of hybrid festivals for the future. And here I'd just like to say that APJ Kolkata Literary Festival is actually having a hybrid festival later this January. And they're working it out with all the protocols in place where they can have physical sessions with the Calcutta based writers and bring in everybody else on screen. So we're
So,
having some very
I
exciting sessions. Yeah.
So that is the idea that I would like to ask Shaili about. Since She the People was essentially an online platform, was it easier for you, Shaili, to think about moving the entire Women's Writers Fest online without, having the thought of the changes, losing out on the interactions with audience and uh,
Yeah, sorry. So I think for us, one of the things has been that as an organization, we were born digital first. So when we look at anything that's digital, it's never intimidating because we were never built on, let's say, an offline world. So that definitely was a positive. So I think to take a step back, there's hardly any replacement for a human to human connection, because I think that really does make a lot of things very very interactive, also real. And now we've been doing events around women for now what 6 years, and one of the reasons why we have physical events in the first place, whether literature or otherwise, is because I think there's hardly anything to match the power of one determined woman sitting right next to you telling you that she can do this, and so can you. So I think that was definitely a big part of things that saw a tinkering during this pandemic. But I also saw that, as people, we tend to go back to a support system that we're very familiar with, and sometimes throwing you into a into a zone which is not as comfortable also makes you go and ask others, right? So I
right.
think the Women Writers Fest going online really made that sort of discomfort emerge in a nice way. People said, "Let me go out and speak to." Ruth Padel, who otherwise we would not normally bring on
Right.
the show.
Right. Right.
Poetry is followed so deeply, and it's even a pandemic poetry was quite moving. So I think that really gave us a chance to shine among people who didn't know us. And that I think made a big plus of this pandemic. But I think also because we tend to be with a lot of upcoming rising young authors, they're very half digital in their approach, right? I mean, of course, everybody loves the
Right.
feel of their book. At the same time, they're very ready to take on any opportunities that create ways by which they can get seen and heard. Most importantly, they can get connected to their readers, many of who are online. So as somebody said, it's great to be in a place where most of the people already are, which is the timelines. So I think
Right.
that was another plus for us when we thought about it. I mean, I don't think we had to even deliberate. We
Yeah.
literally said that, yeah, the festival is here and we're just going to have it here. And people who follow us elsewhere happen to join here. So I think one thing I must add is that because we're a women writers festival, we have already got a filtered audience, which doesn't necessarily explore somebody who's saying, hey, I wouldn't mind going and just listening to, let's say, a very popular author, even though the reader may not be a traditional reader who is not interested in books, right? So we tend to see that our audiences are filtered. That makes it sometimes easier because your audience is a little more sticky and not necessarily. I would say we are in thousands of audiences as opposed to, let's say, hundred thousands of audiences, which is sometimes useful for having stickiness of the community that wants to follow you or how it
Right.
expands. Yeah.
So, um, so Nirmala, your festival has been, I mean, the brand associated with it is like an historic brand. So, uh, the expectations are very different, even if you suddenly decide to change online one day. Uh, so how do you, what is the deliberation, what are you thinking in terms of a group, and what are the challenges that you think will be specific to Hindu Lit for Life?
Yeah. First of all, I think Shaili made some very important points, and I think the basic underlying thing that I got from hers was the resilience of engagement from the people who've already been part of the Women's Writers Fest. And the same, you said that audience keeps coming back. So for us too, what we experienced in the physical festival was a year upon year growth. And in 2019, which was our last, January 2019, which was our last festival, we had over the course of 3 days upward of 35,000 people attending. So, the atmosphere that creates the magic it creates. And it took us a lot of hard work from within the organization to convince, my peers, colleagues, co-workers, or the financiers and the marketing people that literature festival will be something that will bring energy to the parent company. And obviously, newspapers being what they are and the money running out, and we couldn't continue to depend on the newspaper to subsidize this. And very early on we did start taking looking for sponsors and stuff. And one year it would be very good, it would cover say 60%, 70% of the cost. Another year we've had, abysmally, I think the last year 2019, we hardly had any support. Although we had the biggest names and we had the largest number of registrations, we knew it was going to be a big affair. But for some reason, I don't know if any of you can throw light on it. We'd go to the builders. We'd tell people whether it's a builder or a automobile maker, whatever industry. We'd say, look, you can come and exhibit your product there, but you cannot dictate. Don't tell us what we should do in terms of theme and content. I don't know if that was whether there was an expectation that they could steer some conversations or push some conversations, whether that held them back or whether their own internal financing just didn't work out. So we sort of crumbled a little bit in 2020 and decided not to do anything. And then instantly this pandemic. So what we're just currently talking about is our marketing is seeing us limping back, even in terms of a newspaper, because our digital platforms have grown hugely, and as compared to the print. There's anyway prejudice with the Hindu being seen as left of center or whatever, and lots of typical South Indian readership, were are quite angry, I think, and aghast at the kind of positions we've taken, critiquing the government and things like that. We lost some readers. Same time, the digital thing grew, which meant, like just like you said, across the world, there's more accessibility to NRIs and others who are interested in Indian news. So the paper's been sort of limping back to normal. What our marketing people said was, will you consider doing something online? And we're really working on that. And because they said the brand, the festival's brand was sustained over 10 years, and we managed to keep it going. So at present, we're looking at a kind of a mix that I think one of you referred to, Anjum or Shaili. A hybrid. I think Anjum said hybrid
Yes.
presence with having over the years, over this coming year, maybe when things get better, smaller groups of people, local writers to a physical festival, and opening online interactions with a larger audience from across the world. Only thing is, we've also started the reason for them to push us to start thinking about it is because I think we've been very successful with the webinars and the seminars that we've done over the last several months. And most of them, unfortunately, are very specific, related to, say, prepping students for the IAS exam, or some such thing, or doing some science or engineering thing for which the registrations would be very high. But I think the maximum they got in terms of visibility and registrations were around under 2,000. So the shift from 35,000 to saying, you may get only 2,000 is for students. Okay, we may only get, say, 700 people at the most, or 1,000 people. Would a Neil Gaiman or a Tom Friedman be interested in appearing? Or they may be interested, or they may not. They have a lot of things going on. I'm just wondering, how can we get our panelists back, being honestly, because we have no idea what kind of audience they'd have, but it's still important to keep engaged with this sphere, is what I think. So,
I think
anything?
Shelley wants to add something.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I just wanted to ask actually both Nirmala and maybe I'll start with Anjum there, which is that like how how are you looking at audiences henceforth? I know we're thinking of festivals, we're thinking of various other elements, but actually perhaps the audiences might determine the shape and the structure of how festivals will be. And as Nirmala pointed out, that I mean, I myself sort of lived in Chennai and seen the kind of footfalls that festivals like the Hindu Lit for Life, or let's say the Bangalore Literature Festival, and even Calcutta, they expect and get, right? So in a world post-pandemic, I guess now we should also start saying post-vaccine, how do things, look at from an audience point of view? Anjum, maybe you want to go first and then we'll ask Nirmala.
Yeah. So about the audience, I've noticed over this past year that the all the digital events that various people have organized, from slightly more niche discussions around political or historic events to a theatre festival, for example, that friends of mine did, which included international performers. It was amazing how large the audience was compared to their earlier physical manifestations. This was one of the most surprising things. We found that people were able to come in from cities across the country and the world. The age groups were very varied. And it was a kind of, maybe it was the excitement of discovering something that was suddenly accessible to them. But I did feel that it was a very positive trend. And I think part of the reason why many of the organizers don't want to give up on it, they want to be able to plug into that same kind of a global audience, which is, it's interesting because it's like communities which are shaping up around common interests. It's always been there on the net, but now suddenly you have maybe NRI sitting in Australia or Canada or America, who would be interested in listening to a writer speaking in Calcutta, a Bengali writer, or they'd be interested in, a conversation that's happening between a diaspora writers across different continents. So there is a sense that it's suddenly become far more accessible and flexible to a broader range of audiences. Earlier on, the audiences would be limited to whoever was in the city where the festival was. Except for Jaipur, which got a lot of people traveling into Jaipur to attend the festival. Most of the other geographically situated festivals were actually drawing on local audiences. And that comes with its own limitations and challenges because you're in the middle of a very busy metropolitan sort of calendar, which is full of other things to do, and people having to take the time out after work to come and sit in at literary festival sessions. So I think, again, trying to take a positive spin out of this, my experience so far from what I've observed, not just of literature events, but also of other kinds of events, has been that the audience has been much more interestingly varied. and much more global. Numbers may not have been quite as high, but certainly the texture and quality of the audience and the engagement with which they attend is quite commendable, I think.
So,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah.
Shall I just add to what Anjum says? Anjum has raised a very important point about quality and numbers, which I think I absolutely understand that now. The thing is, for us, it's just a mindset, and it is, as you said, Anjum, largely located. With the local people attending. Well, mostly our audience, though it was 35,000, we would have maybe some 20 or 25% of people coming in from Bangalore or Coimbatore or even Bombay and Delhi. But the 80 or 85% of people were from the city. And we were just overwhelmed because there's how an energy is created. There's a vibrancy, there's interaction. Authors are wandering around at the bookstore, and and they charmingly engage with
Yes.
with the student or with an older person who just wants their autograph. So it had its own dynamics and it had its own
Yeah.
beauty, I would say. And maybe the other thing that will happen with this kind of restricted audience, albeit it is from across the globe, will be people who are truly interested. We found a lot of people walking in, whether it was young people or others who retired people or whatever, just coming in because they said we didn't know anything about this particular thing, and we didn't even know. I've had conversations with people saying we didn't know what a literature festival was like, and it was very interesting, very illuminating. They were not really people who came for that panel of, or because they were engaged with that topic. And
Right.
that's a good point that you said, Anjum. We needn't worry maybe so much in this way of doing things about the numbers. As long as
Right.
the sponsors are satisfied, or we needn't worry about the sponsors also, because the technology is going to cost the same whether X number of people register or not.
Absolutely.
It's just the numbers. If
Absolutely.
the numbers are high, could go back to them and ask them to come and support the next year.
Yeah.
But I think it's
Yeah.
important that we
Yeah.
can, positively, the way you said it, we are engaging with a much more, with a global, not only NRI, but with a global audience of, wherever we've had a reach. And for us, the advantage is for, being embedded in the newspaper. The Hindu is read outside of India quite a lot. So I feel that,
Right.
we'll get a spot inside the, the web space of the Hindu, the digital space, so that they'll know this is going to happen. We'll drum up information about
Absolutely.
it going on, and I think
Yeah.
maybe it's a new world that we have to bravely plunge into and not worry about some things that used to be priorities for us
Right.
earlier. So I think it's
Yeah.
a very good point that you made. And going forward, we're still in the planning stages because we're coming fresh off the successes of our webinars and our seminars, and don't know quite. We don't have any other. We last year cancelled the kind of music festival and dance festival. Obviously, all that was cancelled. So we have to move towards the new normal, or to staying on the digital platform till the new normal really appears. So we're just waiting to see how it will evolve, and planning for something mid-year possibly. And like you said, a combination of maybe some physical thing and having a larger, maybe over a weekend, just 2 days, to keep the Lit for Life brand going. And who knows what's going to happen in 22. So it's a very good.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, I would just like to like Shaili to tell us, like, our first digital edition, we decided to get author Anne Cleves, and we got a phenomenal response.
Oh,
It was like, just we just decided we'll get her. And um, so your experience, and that was like viewed by like a huge number of audiences. And we also did a session with diaspora authors, and we got like,
Yeah.
I mean, an amazing response to that. So uh, so your Shelly, your take on that. And and in terms of audiences, like, we are able to reach a huge number of audiences, not just in India but across
Yeah.
the globe.
So my brief answer to that would be like, one of the things is that, where you have authors who have a following, especially those who are writing in specific fields that are underrepresented. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us all to get more and more voices. I think. Sorry, I'm wondering if my audio is okay. Okay, so basically, I think that it's an opportunity for us all to look for authors in different writing genres. I tend to feel, and this is maybe my view as less of the Women Writers Fest founder, but more as a festival hopper, that there are a lot of people who are now putting politics into the mix in a way that's making it look like an evening show on prime time. And sometimes I get a bit disillusioned with the idea of the writing piece itself. So I think, both from an audience's point of view as well as author's point of view, I feel, based on our consumer and community feedback, is that we're putting writing back into the spotlight and keeping that very much in the driver's seat, and making, important discussions happen, like how do you get published? How do you get onto a conversation on a specific genre of your festival? How do you connect with authors who are writing in that genre? And also, that's true for even readers who are specifically looking at some of these genres. So, audiences, I think, is something that we all are going to get more and more familiar with. And that's never a bad thing, because the more audiences you know, the more you go for engagement and involvement over numbers. I feel that's always the mainstay of what is going to be a long standing relationship.
So, Anjum, I would like to ask you and
Right.
about the role of women in these festivals. Women. I mean, most of the curators are. Are women, like, in
Lots of them.
so
Lots of them. Yeah.
lots of them. So, what is the role women play in the post-pandemic or the post-vaccine world, in taking
Right.
the literature festivals forward?
Right. As you said, Deepshika, not just literary festivals, but if you look at the world of editing and publishing, you'll find that there's a very, very good proportion of women there. I know that the larger conversation around women being employed in important positions and positions of responsibility is that they are desperately underrepresented. But I think the publishing and book industry, writing industry, will show that it's not as bad. It's not as bad. I don't have exact figures with me, but I do know that if I contact almost anybody in publishing or editing, they are likely to be a woman writing back to me. So there's a kind of sense that there are a lot of women in this industry as such. I have an amusing sort of personal experience of curating panels for the AKLF over several years, where I would literally do my curation ideally, saying these are the perfect people I would like to put on this panel. And then I'd look at it and I'd say, I think we need a man here, because almost all my panels ended up by being full of very, very interesting and dynamic women. And I would literally have to rack my brains to think, okay, so which male writer can I bring in here to not make this look as if I'm terribly biased in the opposite direction? So I know that very often that is not the experience of a lot of people, because you constantly hear of manels as opposed to more balanced panels. But certainly that was my experience. So I have a rather positive idea about this. I think that women, as women gain in visibility and empowerment in other phases as well, writing is also going to reflect that, and books are also going to reflect that. And if we look back over, certainly in India, if we look back over the field and we try and make a list of maybe the top 10 names that are draws in terms of just going by that very shallow, superficial definition, but who are the big names that will draw audiences to a festival. If you have somebody like a Vikram Seth, you also have an Arundhati Roy. I mean, I know it's a very sort of, like I said, just a very superficial little bandwidth, but you keep going down and you'll find that in almost all the areas and genres you'll have important women presences alongside male presences. So maybe it come through as a bit of a Pollyanna, but I do feel that women have a more important role to play in this creative industry than maybe they have in some of the other industries and fields. I don't know how. What do you think of that? Do the others agree with me?
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I love that Pollyanna approach, Anju. I think it's very real. And the only difference in my case, in our case, is that a lot of our panels were, I mean, we made sure that the author, the people who sat on the panels had a book that was out, say the previous year or something. We did deal with a range of topics that addressed issues of concern for women as well as men and women, and that's the niche of interest also. And even when it had to do with film or to do with politics, so we're equally represented. Only thing is, internally I found, I mean, our team is all women, and we did have younger men helping us with the logistics, with the marketing. But I found, like you said, a very, I mean, it's you had to say, make sure that they were there, right? You said in some panels. So I had to make sure similarly that in marketing, at least those who were there understood the value of what we were doing.
Yeah.
On some years, we had people, men on the team who really weren't even interested and had no clue, and they were there because they had to be there and they had to support us. So that's not a very pleasant way of functioning, which I think held us back in some ways. But overall, honestly, I do believe that women's voices come out in a very enthusiastic and very representative also of diverse groups of women with their interests. It's not always, the Eurocentric. Upper well-educated English-speaking woman. We had lots of panels. We had where we were dealt with, Telugu literature, Tamil literature, or Malayalam literature, and found that the voices there were in fact very much largely dominated by women writers rather than men writers. And of course, overall, if you looked at the curation package, it would maybe be skewed in favor of women panel in terms of women panelists being largely there. But I did think that had this lack of enthusiasm from among my colleagues, the male colleagues, to support the festival. So I think that's something that we have to work on. And even now, when they're coming forward to saying, please go ahead and do something, it's more about the Hindu brand and how will it benefit the brand, not so much about the content of the festival. So I mean, it's not that they're not aware of it, but there is that need for us to have to sort of tell them, this is what we're doing, and everything has to be from ABC onwards. Of course, they all buy into it and they're very enthusiastic and cooperative, but this lack of awareness is troubling to me quite a lot. And I think more and more festivals like this, such as what Shaili is doing, I think will help to further engage, other voices and other perceptions can be drawn into it. So thank you for, doing what you do, all of you, really.
I thank you. Thank you very much. Feels really honored to hear this from women I really admire. One sort of final question to both of you, as you. I'd like to request you to keep it brief. Two things that you would think will be a game changer for authors and readers as we go forward. It may not necessarily be in the virtual or offline element, but things that we'll have to watch out for to stand out as festivals, all of us. Any one of you can go first, maybe Nirmala then, and then Anjum.
Actually, Shaili, I think what is happening, especially with the lessons from the pandemic, is writers and readers realizing the value of content, the value of the printed word, of literature, of the arts, of everything. And I think that will create its own domino effect on the expectations from writers. There'll be much more, I believe, an urgent need to cooperate, to work together, to come together. I think that this is the kind of tentatively, if I spoke to some writer in America and said, will you, like, you had what is her name, and you had somebody, right? You said that and Cleve, somebody, you said there'll be much more interest for people to come together, simply because I think they value that interaction much more than the mechanics of it, or the technology, or the costs of flying in or flying out, the other expenses that go with it. I think there's an urgent need, because we've been unified by this pandemic in some way, unified by the loss that many of us have encountered, the grief, the isolation. And I think that will create its own new dynamic. And I think that there will be an emerging new world kind of awareness of how we need to work together more. I see a greater cooperation between writers, readers, audiences, much less expectations and demands, but more cooperation, I think. I mean, I don't know how it will evolve, but I get that sense as we go along.
Yeah, collaboration sounds good. Cooperation sounds like things that will help more people go together. Anjum?
She's muted.
Yeah, Anjum, you're muted. There. Just let's unmute you.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm
perfect.
so sorry. Yeah, so just responding and picking up from a very, very important point that I think Nirmala just made is that we have had a real deep experience of a global connection. This pandemic has affected everybody, whether you're in a remote area of an island of Australia, whether you're sitting right in the thick of a metropolis like New York, wherever you are, there has been an effect of this pandemic, which has linked us as human beings, as a race, in a way that many of us had not really felt it in such a direct way for a very long time. And I think this is something that we've realized. It's everybody's been affected. You could be poor, you could be desperately disadvantaged, you could be the most privileged celebrity in the world, you could be a world leader. It hasn't spared anyone. And
Yeah.
this, I think, is a huge discovery. We always knew it, but we weren't really thinking about how connected we were and how interdependent we were. And I'm sure that this is going to have an inevitable outcome on the way we think about ideas, concepts. What is literature and book? What are books about? Books are about the mind, how people think, how they translate those ideas onto the page, and other people access them and read them, and maybe now the screen more than the page. So I feel that this is something that we will see happening over as the effects of the pandemic sink in. This sense of connection, this sense that there's somebody sitting far away from me who may be responding to the same writing, the same poetry, the same music, and making those discoveries and wanting to link up. So I think that we'll see a much more global connectiveness. I'm hoping again that we'll see a much more global connectedness across the arts, across the book world and publishing and editing and reading and writing. That's one big great game changer. And I also feel that another one is the ability to focus, which I'm sure Shaili will is something that you'll immediately pick up on and appreciate, on interesting, smaller, but very vital areas of interest. Not always having to go for the big ticket issues, but look at things that maybe people in very remote areas have certain issues of, or concerns, or just passions, and bringing in all this into the world of the literature festival. So it could be something like food and culture. It could be diverse women's experiences. It could be travel. Travel is a big thing. All that one learns about different areas of the world. So I feel that those are some of the areas that may open up in a much more interesting way, because we're suddenly freed from, again, the limitations of geography. We can suddenly see that we can have conversations across time and across space in a very, sort of meaningful way. So maybe these two things from my side.
Time is like the most important thing, and I'm being told that we need to wrap up this session now.
Time never goes away. It never goes away.
So, thank you everyone for joining us, and it's been a really enriching discussion. And I think some of the points were very well made.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you,
Thank you,
Deepshikha,
Anju.
and thank you, Shaili, for holding this together so beautifully. Thank you, Nirmala.
Thank you. Thank you
Finally
very much.
getting
Lovely to
to
connect with
interact.
you.